Hi, Andrew here, and today I'm looking at a section from Flatzoid's R value for the globe livestream, during which we witnessed some supreme interneting from the top leftiest flat earther on the globe. He gave the Flats Reacts treatment to FE Dogma's video, What is the R value of the flat earth equator? And he presented a stunning example of the replication crisis in flat earth science, as Flatzoid attempted to compare flight times for the two city pairs that FE Dogma chose for his video. Now, Flatzoid could have just watched a couple more minutes of the video to see how it's all done, but instead he bravely ventured forth into what appeared to be new territory for him.
I wonder where we can get this quickly. Kiwi! Accept, okay. Sydney to Perth. Doesn't matter. We just want to see the flight times. Okay, 10 to 8 p.m. and it's 10 to, so it's 3 hours flight, guys.
So first we had a time zone failure, in which Flatzoid is unaware that the departure and arrival times listed from Perth to Sydney here are the local times and not the flight duration, and unaware that sitting in between those is the actual flight duration. And then we had a fumbling search, which resulted in him trying to find a flight from Las Vegas's downtown Grand Hotel Valet to Washington, Missouri. When no flight was found, he tried swapping those destinations around and also found there was no flight. So he then followed it up with the astounding revelation that Virgin Atlantic doesn't fly directly between Las Vegas and DC.
Viva Las Vegas to Washington. No results found. Can you even fly to Washington?
Maybe not.
Maybe you have to put Washington DC or Washington State or
Where DC? Okay, but maybe just not in the right place.
No, you're not. So here's how it's done. So the first thing to do is to go to Google Flights. Make sure that you put a one-way trip in. Let's put in Perth. And select the city, not necessarily the airport, just in case there's multiple airports. And we'll badly spell Sydney. We'll pick Sydney, and we shall search. Pick a date, it doesn't matter when, and search. And just for fun, make sure it's a non-stop only. And sure enough, we find 3 flights there, 4 hours 10, 4 hours 15, 4 hours 10. And because flight times vary going west to east versus east to west due to prevailing winds, let's look at the reverse direction. And we get 4 hours 50, 4 hours 50, 4 hours 50, 4 hours 55. So there's 2 of them. Now let's look at the other pair. Las Vegas, again, select the city, not necessarily the airport. And Washington. Now make sure you pick Washington, USA, capital of the United States. And give it a moment. And Las Vegas to Washington, 4 hours 9 to 4 hours 35. And let's select the reverse direction. Again, west to east versus east to west. 5 hours 24, 5 hours 7, 5 hours 25. There's a few flights there, all pretty similar times. Now, the next important thing to do is actually find out how far these airports are apart. I use a website called greatcirclemap.com. We're just going to put Perth, and we're going to put Sydney in there, and go. And we have a distance of 3,284 kilometres. Las Vegas, and it doesn't really matter which airport you pick, they're all about the same. Washington, Dulles obviously the major one, and go again. And 3,324 kilometres. So, just like FE Dogma said, they are about the same distance. And so for Perth to Sydney, the average flight time for both directions is around about 4 hours 35, giving an average speed of 720 kilometres an hour. and the average for both directions of Las Vegas to Washington is about 4 hours 47, giving an average speed of about 700 kilometers an hour. So they do come out at around about the same sort of distances and the same sort of speeds. So let's look at some other flights. So we'll pick some long east to west ones, this time in the southern hemisphere. And we'll pick our favourite, Sydney to Johannesburg, about 11,000 kilometres. It's about 14 hours in one direction, about 12 hours in the other, average speed of about 860 kilometres an hour. Now, the recently reintroduced Melbourne to Santiago, Chile, 11,300 kilometres, about 13 hours one way and about 14 hours the other, resulting in about 840 kilometres an hour average speed. Now, between Africa and South America, below the equator, there aren't a lot of direct flights. The only one I found was Luanda, Angola to Sao Paulo, Brazil. It's from 8 degrees south to 23 degrees south, so between the equator and the Tropic of Capricorn. 6,500 kilometres and an average speed of around 780 kilometres an hour. And moving a little bit further north, there is Panama to Istanbul, around 11,000 kilometres, with an average of about 820 kilometres an hour. And we also have Frankfurt to Los Angeles, about 9,300 kilometres, about 830 kilometres an hour as well. Now, I realise this is getting a little bit monotonous, but it is just proof that planes fly about the same speed no matter where they go around the globe, and the distances do indeed match the distances on the globe, as stated. So for some differences, we'll go north-south instead of east-west this time. Now, the east-west flights are often battling prevailing headwinds going west, and they get a tailwind to the east, and that's why there's a bit of a time difference one way versus the other. North-south, you don't really have that, so we'll go to Melbourne, Hong Kong, about 8,100 kilometres, where we have about the same time going one way or the other, and resulting in about an 890 kilometre an hour average. Now we'll go over to London to Cape Town, 9,600 kilometres, again about the same time in both directions, resulting in an average speed of about 820 kilometres an hour. And penultimately, I'll look at a couple of flights where the average speed by doing this sort of analysis looks kind of slow, but of course there's a reason for it. So firstly, Johannesburg to Istanbul, which is about 7,400 kilometres, and based on flight times, is about 720 kilometres an hour average speed, which seems a lot slower. However, due to political considerations, the actual flight route taken is over 8,100 kilometres, so about 700 kilometres extra, and so that bumps up, by our analysis, the average flight speed of about 780 kilometres an hour, back to similar numbers to some of those other flights. And also London to Tokyo, where the Great Circle is 9,600 kilometres, which would put the average speed at about 675 kilometres an hour. But again, due to political considerations, the actual flight path takes 12,700 kilometres, so over 3,000 kilometres, or about a third longer than the Great Circle route. And that bumps up the average speed to about 890 kilometres an hour. So again, a pretty normal figure for what we'd expect. And the final flight I'm going to look at is what is known as the world's longest passenger flight, which is Singapore to New York, done by Singapore Airlines, which the normal Great Circle route would take it straight north over Russia and the North Pole and approach New York directly from the north. Now, again, due to political considerations, that route is no longer viable. So instead of about a 15,000 kilometre Great Circle route, they now take around about a 17,000 kilometre route, avoiding some sensitive areas of the world. Now, the interesting thing is that when they go from Singapore to New York, they go eastward by going up past Japan, the Northern Pacific, past the Aleutian Islands of Alaska, and then across the US from sort of Washington State across to New York. And when that plane returns to Singapore, instead of turning around and going back in the other direction, because of the prevailing winds and because they are approaching travelling between antipodal points, it is actually better for them to continue travelling eastwards. And instead of going back across the Northern Pacific, they then travel across the North Atlantic and France and Turkey, Iran, India, and arrive in Malaysia coming in from the west. So those planes, interestingly, on their normal scheduled routes, end up doing a circumnavigation of the globe. So Flatzoid, there's how you do it. There's how you find your flights, distances, and average speeds, and sure enough, everything matches the globe and the capabilities of the aeroplanes quite well. Important to note that when you do this, have a look at the actual distance the planes travel, not just the Great Circle route, because of airspace considerations perhaps, and because of prevailing weather conditions, those distances will actually be different to the Great Circle distance. And to lighten things up after all these boring numbers, here's a little bit of too much information that PJ Crookshank shared with us during the live stream.
I can go on Vicky's back garden, yeah.